Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Okay, well, I hope you're all good. I've been busy here, as I always am. I just got the author copies, the advanced copies of Epically Good Greek Myths, which is the fourth book based on this podcast from stories that I first told on this podcast. And obviously, it's all the Greek myth ones. Well, the ones we've done most recently about Jason and the quest for the giant, the golden fleece, that sort of thing. Well, the golden sheet cake, as it is in my versions. So yeah, it's a whole book just of Greek myth stories and Hercules and all those things. And they loved Medusa so much, which was actually in one of the other books that they stuck the Medusa story in there as well. So anyway, that's going to come out at the beginning of March. And so I need to have a book launch. And because I have been so insanely busy, if you've been following along, you will realize I did an enormous amount of travel in 2024, an unsustainable amount. And so for this book, I'm not going to do a big theatre show book launch like I normally do. I thought, well, because it's based on the podcast, I thought I'd do an online book launch because you can do these live stream podcast episodes. At least, I was under the impression that this was all possible. And so I thought, yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll launch it all. I'll live stream it all online. And then people all around the world who support the podcast can drop in and watch live or watch the video later or listen to the podcast of the live special later. So that's my big idea, doing a big online launch for the book. So I haven't planned much further than that. I did teach myself how to use all the streaming software last night. I had to learn how to use a new piece of software that means that I'll be able to stream on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube simultaneously. And then I've got to figure out how I can upload that onto the podcast platform. But that's my problem. You don't have to worry about that. For the thing that you should note is when I'm doing it, which will probably be, this is the plan at the moment, to do it at 1 p.m. on the 8th of March, which is a Saturday. And that's 1 p.m. Australian time, like Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne time. So that actually works out. Oh, I got it all written down somewhere. That works out that people in America will be able to listen to. It might be a bit late at night for people in New York, like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But because the biggest audiences for the podcast are Australia, New Zealand, America, and Canada. So they'll all be able to listen to it. Unfortunately, it will be an awkward time for people in Europe and the UK. But as I say, the whole live stream show will be recorded and you'll be able to watch it later on my website or YouTube. So that's coming up. That's what I'm planning at the moment, my extracurricular activity outside of writing books and doing this podcast. I've also started work properly on writing my next Shakespeare book, which is Romeo and Juliet. So that's actually what my brain is mainly full of at the moment. And then doing the podcast is my weekend project. And then, as I say, it suddenly occurred to me, oh dear, I have to launch a book and I have to make arrangements. So that's all coming up. All right. But that's not what you're here for. You're here for a story. So let's get into it. Odysseus and the Cyclops, as told by Nanny Piggins. When Derek, Samantha and Michael came home from school, they found Nanny Piggins feeling very sorry for herself. She was lying on the sofa in the living room with an ice pack over her eyes as Boris spoon-fed her chocolate pudding. "What happened?" asked Derek. "There's been an accident," said Boris with a sniff. He'd clearly been crying. He cried most days, both when he was sad and when he was happy. But today these were apparently tears of sadness. He was a very empathetic bear who did not like to see misfortune befall his sister. "Another head injury," asked Samantha. Nanny Piggins often received head injuries. When you're a former professional flying pig, you think nothing of it. It's like a football player getting a stubbed toe. You'd worry if they didn't have a stubbed toe, because it would show they weren't kicking the ball hard enough. "No, worse," sobbed Boris, biting the back of his paw, trying to stop the flood of tears already beginning to spill from his eyes. Apart from being the best ballet dancer in the world, Boris also had the most highly developed tear ducts in the world, as a result of all the years of relentless training he had given them. "What's worse than a head injury?" asked Michael. "Not a toothache?" Michael knew the injury his nanny feared more than any other was a toothache, because a toothache could lead to having to cut back on her consumption of solid chocolate until her teeth had a chance to recover. Luckily, she had so much calcium in her diet from all the chocolate milk she ate, Nanny Piggins had never had a toothache, so this had never happened. "Not that serious," said Nanny Piggins, "but still extremely inconvenient. I have injured my eye." Nanny Piggins raised her ice pack to reveal that she was wearing an eye patch, just like the type of eye patch a pirate would wear, except much more spectacular because her eye patch was hot pink and bedazzled with diamantes that glistened in the light. In fact, knowing Nanny Piggins, the diamantes may well have been real diamonds. After all, a spectacularly beautiful pink eye patch covered in diamonds was just the sort of gift she might receive from a super successful pirate who fell desperately in love with her at first sight. And men did fall desperately in love with Nanny Piggins all the time. So she had bumped into a pirate while the children were at school. This was entirely possible, indeed probable. "What happened?" asked Samantha. She sat down, picked up a spoon, and helped herself out of the industrial-sized tub of chocolate pudding on the coffee table. This was clearly going to be a good tale, and her nanny had always taught her it was important to snack while you listened to maintain your blood chocolate levels, so you could really concentrate. "Did Nanny Ann finally crack and attack you with a knife?" asked Derek. Nanny Ann had been passive-aggressively undermining Nanny Piggins for years, so perhaps she had decided to give up all attempts at subtlety and just attack Nanny Piggins with a weapon instead. "No," said Nanny Piggins. "It was a wooden spoon." "She attacked you with a wooden spoon!" exclaimed Samantha. She didn't like Nanny Ann either, but she couldn't believe that Nanny Ann would be brave enough to attack Nanny Piggins. Nanny Piggins was very accomplished at exacting revenge with stomps of the foot or bites to the shin, or assaults with any type of kitchen utensil. "No, I stabbed myself in the eye," said Nanny Piggins, "but it was entirely Hans' fault." "Really?" said Derek. This was a surprise. Hans was their local baker, and he was incredibly talented. He was also incredibly tolerant of Nanny Piggins' frequent and outrageous demands. Partly because, even after all the hijackings and thefts of his products, Nanny Piggins spent so much money in his shop that she was still by far his best customer. And partly because Nanny Piggins had introduced him to his wonderful wife, the Crown Princess of Melvadonia. So, since he owed so much to Nanny Piggins, for Hans to stab her in the eye would be out of character. "Yes," said Nanny Piggins. "He wouldn't relinquish his spoon to me when I demanded that he do so." "You demanded that Hans, a professional baker with 30 years of experience creating delicious cakes and pastries, give you his wooden spoon?" asked Samantha. "Well, it sounds unreasonable when you put it that way," conceded Nanny Piggins, "but I was only trying to help him." "How was taking away his wooden spoon going to help a baker?" asked Michael. "Well, I had just finished telling him how disappointing his lamingtons were," began Nanny Piggins. "But his lamingtons are lovely," protested Derek. "Oh, they're fine for traditional lamingtons, I suppose," said Nanny Piggins, "but they lack imagination. I explained to Hans that they'd be much better if, instead of using vanilla sponge cake, he used chocolate sponge cake. And if, instead of using coconut, he used chocolate sprinkles. And if, instead of using a thin coating of chocolate sauce to hold the sprinkles on, he used a really thick layer of molten chocolate. With those few minor alterations, the recipe would be vastly improved." "But that wouldn't be a lamington then," said Derek. "It'd be a slice of chocolate cake dipped in chocolate and covered in chocolate sprinkles." "Exactly, that's my point," said Nanny Piggins. "But Hans must have been feeling very fragile this morning for some reason." "Perhaps because you were screaming at him in his own shop," suggested Boris. "Yes, that may have had something to do with it," said Nanny Piggins. "Anyway, he told me I didn't know what I was talking about." The children gasped. To tell Nanny Piggins that she didn't know what she was talking about when it came to cake was shocking. Yes, she may be deluded and chocolate-obsessed, but no one could rationally deny that she was well informed. Naturally, I thought it best to settle the argument by proving him wrong, by baking a batch of my new style, chocolate-dipped, chocolate-covered chocolate lamingtons, and forcing him to eat one, said Nanny Piggins. So I went around behind the counter and grabbed the wooden spoon in his hand. But when I did, Hans didn't let go. Gosh, said Michael. And it turns out, said Nanny Piggins, I will be the first to admit it, I had underestimated him. I discovered that Hans has incredible grip strength. In hindsight, I should have expected it. Hans does spend all day stirring and whipping and beating ingredients, so of course his forearm strength would be unparalleled. But when he used all that strength to hang on to his wooden spoon and not let go, I was taken by surprise. So you didn't get it off him? Asked Derek. Of course I got it off him, said Nanny Piggins, but it took a moment. I was pulling with all my might, and that wasn't working, so I did the next rational thing. What was that? Asked Samantha. I stomped really hard on his foot, said Nanny Piggins, which did make Hans let go because he needed both hands to grab his foot as he hopped around the kitchen in pain. But the problem was, when he released the spoon so suddenly, and I was still pulling on it so hard, I suddenly jerked the spoon handle into my own eye. Which caused irreversible damage to your eye? Asked Derek. No, luckily there happened to be an eye surgeon in the bakery at the time, buying lemon meringue tarts, so obviously a woman of great intellect and understanding. She had a look at my eye for me in exchange for the promise of a dozen of my chocolate-dipped, chocolate-covered lamingtons when I got a chance to make them, and she said my eye would be fine. It was just a bit bruised, and it would heal nicely if I rested it and wore an eye patch for 3 days. Well, that's not too bad, said Samantha. Yes, it is, said Nanny Piggins. When you only have one eye, you have no depth perception. How can I bake lamingtons without depth perception? The children did not know how to respond. They weren't entirely sure what depth perception was, so they had no idea whether or not it was essential to cake baking. It's nothing short of a tragedy, said Nanny Piggins. It almost makes me feel sorry for the Cyclops. Who's the Cyclops? Asked Michael. Was that another customer in the bakery? Well, no, I didn't see a Cyclops in there this morning, said Nanny Piggins, but I couldn't see much of anything once I'd stubbed myself in the eye with a spoon. But no, the Cyclops I'm referring to was the Cyclops from the ancient Greek story days, someone my dear cousin Odysseus bumped into. So a friend of the family, said Samantha. Oh, no, said Nanny Piggins. Things did not go well when Odysseus and the Cyclops met. As a result, the Cyclops family have not seen eye to eye with the Piggins family ever since. Well, they could never see eye to eye because Cyclops is a giant, so a lot taller. And by the end of his meeting with my cousin, the Cyclops didn't have that one eye anymore, so he couldn't see eye to eye with anyone, not even himself when he looked in the mirror. I think you're going to have to tell us the whole story, said Derek. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins. Push the pudding bowl closer, Boris, and run to the kitchen and fetch the serving spoons. If I'm going to tell an epic tale, these little dessert spoons you've been using to feed me will not provide enough sustenance for me to effectively convey the story. And so 5 minutes later, they were all holding large serving spoons and tucking into the pudding as Nanny Piggins began the story of Odysseus and the Cyclops. Now, where did we leave off with Odysseus and her Odyssey? Asked Nanny Piggins. They'd just run away from the lotus flower eaters, said Derek. Yes, said Nanny Piggins. So Odysseus sailed his ships away from there as fast as she could. But as you will remember, the only reason they stopped in the land of the lotus flower eaters was because they were hungry. And when they left so hastily, they'd not picked up any food, so they were still hungry. Admittedly, they did still have lots of jugs of chocolate milk, which they'd looted when they'd beaten Troy in the war. But the problem with chocolate milk is it's so delicious and soothing, it can make you drowsy, particularly if you've been rowing all day. So every time Odysseus let her men have some, they fell asleep, and the boat drifted about going nowhere. They were never going to get home to Ithaca if everyone is asleep all the time, so Odysseus decided to pull in at the next island to find a snack. Now, as luck would have it, the next island they came to was very promising. As their ship sailed closer, they could see there were grapevines and olive trees and sheep grazing on the hills. But from the distance, they could not see the size of the sheep, which will become important later. Odysseus left 500 of her men on a small island nearby. She didn't want to intimidate the locals by turning up all at once. Then she set out with just 50 soldiers to look for food. And so they had something to trade. They brought with them an enormous jug of the Trojan chocolate milk. In fact, the jug was so big they had to use 2 ship's oars to carry it. They threaded an oar through each of the handles on the jug, and then with a man on either end of each oar, they could carry it together, all 4 of them. Then the search party made their way up into the hills, where they found caves. "This must be where the local people live," said Odysseus. "They look like very big caves," said Eurylochus. "Well, perhaps they like open-plan living and cathedral ceilings," said Odysseus. They went into the first cave they came to see if there was anybody at home. Once their eyes got used to the darkness, they realized there was no one there, but they were surprised to discover that the cave was full of enormous cheeses. "Cheeses," said Derek. "Yes, cheeses," said Nanny Piggins. "How peculiar," said Eurylochus, "to have enough milk to make all these cheeses, but not use it to make milk chocolate, or at the very least, cheesecake." Privately, Odysseus agreed, but she did not want to be disrespectful to their host. "Now, Eurylochus, in different cultures they have different ways, and we should be understanding. On this island, apparently, they really like cheese. Perhaps it's chocolate-flavoured cheese," she reasoned. "Well, let's take one and get out of here," said the men. "We can't just steal a cheese," said Odysseus. "That would be rude and very silly. If we wait and are polite to our host, they might have something nice to eat, like a cheesecake hidden somewhere in a cupboard that they're prepared to share with us." And they didn't have to wait long before they heard the sound of movement outside and the sound of bleating sheep. Then before they knew it, the sheep entered the cave. "They let the sheep come indoors?" asked Samantha. "What's so odd about that?" asked Nanny Piggins. Samantha realised that Nanny Piggins was a pig who lived indoors, and there was no polite way to say what was on her mind. "Oh, nothing. I just thought that an animal as lovely as a sheep would have a nicer home than a cave." Nanny Piggins nodded, accepting this backtracking at face value. "The extraordinary thing about these sheep was not their preference for abodes," said Nanny Piggins. "It was their size. They were enormous." "It's not nice to be sizest," said Boris, who, at 10 feet tall and weighing 700 kilograms, was very sensitive about his own size. "Of course not," said Nanny Piggins. "I'm in no way suggesting that these sheep were overweight. I'm saying that they were giant sheep, 12 feet tall and 20 feet long." "12 feet tall? That's taller than me," said Boris. "They must have been forever hitting their heads on door frames." "Oh, perhaps that's why they lived in a cave," suggested Michael. "Indeed," said Nanny Piggins, "but the size of the sheep was nothing compared to the size of the person who owned the sheep, and he entered the cave behind them. He was 60 feet tall, a monster of a man, and not just in size. His features were monstrous too. His face was angry, his hair was wild, and his eyes, well, they weren't eyes. There was just one of them, one great big eye in the middle of his enormous forehead." "Huh?" said Derek. "This giant monster," said Nanny Piggins, "was a Cyclops." "Weird," said Michael. "Well, I'm sure it wasn't weird for the Cyclops," said Nanny Piggins. "I'm sure 2-eyed people looked weird to him. But it was quite shocking for Odysseus, who had never seen a Cyclops before. She had a lot of follow-up questions about whether or not the Cyclops had any sense of depth perception and where he wore sunglasses that fit, but she decided now was not the time to ask them. "Greetings," said Odysseus. "We are hungry travellers, and we were hoping to—" But Odysseus never got to finish his sentence, because at that moment the Cyclops snatched up one of Odysseus's men in his enormous fist and shoved that man straight into his mouth. "Delicious," said the Cyclops. "Hey, you can't do that," said Odysseus. "These are the ancient Greek story days where men are noble and a host is honour bound to follow the rules of hospitality." The Cyclops looked at her for a moment, then snatched up another soldier and tossed him into his cavernous mouth too, crunching the soldier down like a piece of popcorn. "Yum," said the Cyclops. "I'm not a person, I'm a Cyclops, so I don't care about the rules of hospitality, because I don't have any honour. Who are you?" "My name," said Odysseus, Now, she didn't want the Cyclops to know her real name because Odysseus knew she was really, really famous for being a very good general, and she thought if the Cyclops found out that he might kill her instantly too. So she made up a fib. She said, "My name is Atol." "Atol," said the Cyclops. "That's a strange name." "Yes, that's my surname," said Odysseus. "My surname is Atol, and my first name is Nobody. And I came here to give you a gift." "A gift," said the Cyclops. "I like gifts. What is it?" "I don't think I should tell you because you've been very naughty killing my men," said Odysseus. "Oh, please, Nobody. I'll be ever so good if you give it to me," said the Cyclops. "All right, if you promise not to kill any more men, I promise to give it to you," said Odysseus. "Oh, Nobody, I promise, pretty promise, no more killing," said the Cyclops. "Now give me my gift, gimme, gimme, gimme." "All right," said Odysseus, and she waved to her men to bring forward the giant jug. "I bring you chocolate milk," said Odysseus. "Oh, what's that?" asked the Cyclops. "The finest drink in all of Greece," said Odysseus. "I'll be the judge of that," said the Cyclops. He snatched up the jug and threw the whole thing in his mouth. "What, even the jug?" asked Derek. "Yes. The Cyclops wasn't the most sensible monster," said Nanny Piggins, "but I suppose if a monster was sensible, that would ruin their image." Nobody, that was yummy," said the Cyclops. "I'll just wash it down with another snack." He snatched up another soldier and tossed him in his mouth. "Hey, you promised to stop eating my men," protested Odysseus. "I know," said the Cyclops with a grin. "I lied." "You are a rotter," accused Odysseus. But the Cyclops just yawned. The milk had made him sleepy. "Oh, I'm going to eat the rest of you in the morning for my breakfast," said the Cyclops, before curling up on the floor and falling into a deep sleep. Now, Odysseus's men were absolutely terrified, having watched 3 of their friends get eaten like they were peanuts. So they rushed to the entrance of the cave, desperate to escape. But the Cyclops had sealed the cave shut with a huge boulder that not even the remaining 47 soldiers with all their strength could move. "We're doomed," said Eurylochus. "No, we're not," said Odysseus, "for this is just the beginning of my cunning plan." "Was 3 of us getting eaten part of your plan too?" asked a soldier. "No, I hadn't planned that bit," admitted Odysseus, "but I have got a plan for what to do next. Fetch me one of the oars we used to carry the jug in here." That is what they did. While the Cyclops slept, the soldiers used their swords to whittle away at the end of the oar until it was a very sharp point. "Now roast the pointy end in the fire," said Odysseus. "Get it good and hot." When the point of the oar was glowing red, Odysseus and her 10 strongest men grabbed hold of the oar. She took up a position closest to the burning point so she could aim it. "All right, men. On the count of 3, we charge," ordered Odysseus. "Charge at what?" asked Eurylochus. "At the Cyclops," said Odysseus. "Are you out of your mind?" asked Eurylochus. "You'll only make it angry, and I bet making it angry makes it hungry." "Just do as you're told," said Odysseus. 1, 2, 3, charge! They ran at the Cyclops. Odysseus aimed the pointy end and rammed the burning tip straight into the centre of the Cyclops' enormous eye. "Oh, gross," said Samantha. "That's really horrible," said Derek. "Oh, Nanny Piggins, I kind of wish you hadn't told us this one." "It was indeed horrible," agreed Nanny Piggins. "The Cyclops screamed. The men ran away in terror. The Cyclops thrashed about trying to kill them all. But with an oar stuck in his eye, he couldn't see a thing. The Cyclops pulled the oar out, but the damage had been done. The Cyclops would never see again." "Help! Help me! I'm blind!" cried the Cyclops. The other one-eyed giants from the nearby caves came running at the sound. "Polymetheus, what's wrong?" they cried. "Nobody at all has attacked me," cried Polymetheus. "Nobody at all has betrayed me. Nobody at all has blinded me." "Oh," said the other villagers. "Nobody at all? That's all right then." "If it was nobody at all, it must have just been a bad dream," suggested another villager. "He's always having bad dreams," said a third villager, "probably because of all the cheese he eats right before bedtime." And so all the other Cyclopses from the village went back to their own caves and back to sleep. When Polymetheus realized no one was going to rescue him, he was distraught. "That worthless lot won't aid me when I'm in my greatest need. No matter. I shall kill all these people myself in the morning and eat them for my breakfast. You shall not escape my cave, nobody. You shall all die come morning." When morning came, light started to shine in around the cracks of the boulder, and that made the sheep start bleating. "Oh, my lovelies," said the Cyclops, "you want to get to your sweet green grass on the hillsides, don't you? Daddy will let you out to eat your breakfast before I start on my own." The Cyclops rolled the great boulder from the doorway. "I know you're still here, nobody," said the Cyclops. "Don't think you're getting away from me." The Cyclops stood in the doorway and felt the sides of each sheep that went past to make sure that none of the soldiers snuck through. But Odysseus was cunning. She had strapped together the sheep in threes, and one of her men clung to the underside of each middle sheep so the Cyclops couldn't feel them there. Then, when all the soldiers were out safely, Odysseus herself clung to the underside of the last sheep, who was the Cyclops' favourite, his giant ram. "Oh, my sweet ram," said the Cyclops, hugging him fondly. "Now that I am blind, I will no longer be able to shear you and milk the lady sheep. I will have to give you all away to my worthless neighbours, who did not come to help when I was blinded last night." Odysseus clung to the underside, the Cyclops' enormous fingers just millimetres away as he hugged the ram. But a moment later, the Cyclops released the sheep, and he ran out into the sunlight. Odysseus was free. She dropped down and ran up the path to join her men, and together they herded the flock of giant sheep back to their boats as quickly as they could. Once they had all the sheep on board, they pushed out to sea, and they breathed a huge sigh of relief to have escaped safely. When the 3 soldiers had been eaten, they had all thought they were going to die. They praised the gods for their good fortune. Odysseus in particular was very proud of herself with getting away with 547 of her soldiers still alive and several dozen enormous sheep for them to eat on the return journey. "Hey, they were going to eat the sheep, even though the sheep had just saved their lives?" asked Samantha. "Samantha, this is the ancient Greek story days," said Nanny Piggins. "There were no vegetarians in the ancient Greek story days." Well, I'm sure there were, but there aren't many that the myths are written about. Anyway, as they sailed out to sea, Odysseus was feeling very smug about the whole nobody at all trick, and she couldn't resist getting credit for it. So she stood on the stern of the ship and yelled back at the island. "Oi, Cyclops! I just want you to know you weren't fooled by somebody called Nobody at All. You were fooled by me, Odysseus Piggins, legendary general from the Battle of Troy. I am the one who blinded you. And this day, where I tricked you, shall become legendary. For centuries to come, bards will write about my brilliance in poems 60 stanzas long." "She was proud to have poetry written about her?" asked Boris in disbelief. "Well, it was the ancient story days," explained Nanny Piggins. "Having a poem written about you back then was like being the star of a Netflix special now." "Oh," said Michael. But this bragging made the soldiers nervous. Boss," said Eurylochus, "perhaps we should start rowing now." Odysseus laughed. "Ha! What can a blind fool do to me?" "Odysseus, is it? Then I shall curse you by name," bellowed the Cyclops. "I call on my father Poseidon. Hear me now. I call upon you to avenge my injury, since I can no longer avenge myself. Curse Odysseus Piggins!" The Cyclops picked up a mighty boulder and threw it in the direction of where Odysseus' voice had come from, and he only just missed. The boulder fell short of the ship and threw up a huge wave which sloshed over the boat, almost capsizing them. The men all heaved their oars to get further away than the Cyclops could throw. Odysseus laughed again, a little nervously this time. "Ha! You can't hurt me," said Odysseus. The Cyclops hurled another rock, again only narrowly missing and churning up the sea. "Perhaps you could stop yelling for a bit and help us row," suggested Eurylochus. Okay. Who did he say his father was?" asked Odysseus. "Poseidon," said Eurylochus. "Poseidon," said Odysseus. "Isn't that the name of the god of the sea?" "Yes," said Eurylochus. "Perhaps he means a different Poseidon," said Odysseus. Well, I hope so, said Eurylochus. Otherwise we're in a lot of trouble. But he didn't, and they were, said Nanny Piggins, because deep at the bottom of the sea, Poseidon heard the wails of anguish coming from his son, and he became angry. And it is never a good idea to make the god of the sea angry, especially not when you're about to undertake a sea voyage. The end. Time for bed. But was he all right? Asked Michael. Who? Asked Nanny Piggins. Odysseus. Michael Green, you know the story of Odysseus is so legendarily long and complicated that the word for long and complicated is named after her. So of course it wasn't all right. If all stories turned out all right, they'd be very short and boring indeed. Sometimes it's nice to be short and boring, said Samantha. In real life, yes, agreed Nanny Piggins. But stories are always much more interesting than reality, which is why we like them so much. The end. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me. I will keep you updated. You can check out my social media feed for updates on the upcoming live stream. I know a lot of young people aren't allowed on social media, which is totally understandable. So I will post something about it on my website once it's all sorted out as well. And I will explain the further details as I plan them next week. So that's it for now. Until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.